Hello, my name is Adam Elga, and I'm here with Roger White and Josh Schechter. We're following up the last Philosophy TV episode with David Christensen and Roy Sorensen, which was on disagreement, the problem of disagreement. And what we're going to talk about today is a cousin of that problem, sometimes called the problem of contingency or the problem of irrelevant factors. But first, I'll let Roger and Josh introduce themselves. My name is Adam, and I teach philosophy at Princeton.
I'm Roger White. I teach philosophy at MIT.
And I'm Josh Schechter, and I teach philosophy at Brown University.
So, Roger, give us the rundown. The problem of contingency.
Let's see. So maybe we could consider a case close to home. If you think about some of your beliefs, perhaps religious beliefs, moral beliefs, political beliefs, it's likely that you share your beliefs with others, perhaps in your family or in the community that you grow up in. You notice that in other communities, people think rather differently. It's natural to think, well, if I had been brought up in that circumstance, then I would be thinking very differently and have very different views than my actual views. This sort of thought can be unsettling. It sort of feels sort of arbitrary that there's this factor which is ultimately responsible for your belief, which isn't just a matter of having assessed the evidence or the sorts of things we think are good ways to form beliefs. So that's the sort of worry that many of us have sort of reflected on ourselves probably. So it's easy to get an intuitive feel for the worry, much harder to say in a principled way why it's a worry, I think. So that's some of the things.
How is this worry different than the problem of disagreement? The problem of people who you think are just as good thinkers as you coming to a contrary conclusion on the basis of similar evidence.
Yeah, so I think you do want to distinguish it from that because a lot of the cases we consider, like the one I mentioned, already involve a lot of disagreement. I mean, part of the reason we think that I would have thought differently in different circumstances is that we're aware of a lot of people who do think differently. But I think the issues are separate, and it's an interesting question whether the problem of arbitrary factors raises an additional problem. It's perhaps not clear that it does raise an additional problem over and above that of disagreement. But you can still raise the puzzle in more contrived sort of cases. If you imagine seeing a video of your earlier self and you see the evil scientist flipping a coin to determine whether you would reason in this way or that, we can imagine that this doesn't involve anything about anyone else, even in existence. Still, the thought that ultimately my thoughts can be traced back to this arbitrary coin flip can be disturbing.
But what's the big deal? I mean, surely it's a matter of chance what evidence you get, and your beliefs are going to depend on your evidence. So why is it bad? Why isn't just this an ordinary case of your beliefs depend on your evidence, as they should? And since your evidence can depend on, since what evidence you get could depend on anything, your beliefs could depend on anything. No big deal. No undermining.
Yeah, so it's certainly true that not just any sort of arbitrary factor should be bothersome. I mean, any belief I have could be traced back to factors outside of the ones that would normally cite as, the grounds for my belief. That shouldn't bother us. So it's actually a little tricky to distinguish what it is that makes the problem cases if they are. One natural thought is to say, well, in the case, I can sort of tell that in the case where it's just a matter of luck that I obtain this evidence, nevertheless I can tell that I'm better off with evidence. Mm-hmm. And I don't have to sort of rely on the thinking that I've done to reach my conclusions on the basis of that evidence. So the sort of worry, one way of getting at the worry in the case where I think, well, if I'd been brought up over here, I'd be a Republican or something, is the worry starts to arise, well, how can I tell that I've actually got the better upbringing? I mean, one side got sort of a poorer upbringing, if they're wrong and the other was right. How am I in a position to sort of judge that I have the better upbringing? I mean, of course, if I'd been in that circumstances, I would think that I was better off. If I grew up a Republican, I think I was better off than the situation which I actually grew up in. It seems we lack some independent way of assessing whether I have got lucky in that sort of way. Whereas in the case where I happen to have obtained evidence, it seems I can tell, well, clearly you're better off having more evidence. And I can clearly see I would have been worse off if I had less evidence. So I don't just have to rely on the kind of reasoning which has led me to my conclusion. I can say, independently of the particular evidence, particular reasoning which has led to my judgments, I'm in a position to see that I'm in a better position.
This is kind of an oddball case, and we actually, I don't know that anyone's talked about this case, but I was just reminded of grocery shopping. So, as it happens, I tend to buy more at the grocery store when I'm hungry. Now, the truth is, I have independent checks on whether I'm buying the right amount because this happened to me many times. But take the case of someone who's out shopping for the first time. He fills his cart to what he thinks is the right level, and then someone says, I notice you're kind of hungry now. You would have bought a lot less if you'd been less hungry. And the question is, should that make the guy less confident that he'd gotten the right amount? Of course, one response is just to say, yes, I agree, my hunger level does influence how much groceries I buy. But as I can see now that I've bought pretty much the right amount, so it must be that this hunger level is just the hunger level that gets me to assess my groceries accurately.
Yeah, I don't know. Does Josh want to come in on this too?
Sure. I mean, that sounds to me like an illegitimate way of reasoning. There seems to be something rather question-begging going on there. I mean, it seems like the intuitively correct response to make in that case is, gosh, if I'm convinced by the person I've run into that my hunger level is actually relevant here, I should, think, oh, well, maybe I put way too much in my cart. I mean, that's my reaction to the case.
Great. Okay, so what's nice about this case is it really gives you the feeling that, hey, there's something wrong going on there. But now switch it back to the politics case, and I think if I had grown up in a different household, I would have had, even on the basis of similar evidence, political views right at the opposite end of the spectrum. It's much harder in that case to say, oh, well, I'm just going to give them up. And there's much more temptation in that case to say, yep, I would have had those other views if I'd been raised in that other godforsaken end of the country. But good thing I wasn't. Good thing I was raised right here where they tell it straight.
So it sounds like, Adam, you're pushing the idea that there's something question-begging going on, and that really what this problem of contingency amounts to is something to do with, worries about whether we're reasoning in a question-begging way. And well, I don't know. Actually, maybe you should say what the general moral you're trying to draw out of the case is.
The grocery case was just supposed to be a case in which there seems to be a lot of undermining being produced by the news of contingency, the news that the hunger was making a big difference. And the question is, how much does that transfer over? Is that legitimate? And how much does it transfer over to the political case?
Right. I mean, I guess maybe I was going too fast. It sounded to me like the example you gave suggested there was undermining in the grocery case, and then the reaction you suggested on behalf of the shopper, oh, well, I'm glad I have the right amount of hunger, because I see that it's, properly, my grocery cart is properly filled, so I must be hungry at just the right amount to get me to have the right amount of groceries. I mean, it sounded like you were agreeing that that was a sort of question-begging style of reasoning. And now if we moved over to the moral and political case, if this is analogous, then we have, you could draw two morals. First, there is a considerable amount of undermining from finding out that you grew up in a Republican neighborhood as opposed to a Democratic neighborhood, or the religious neighborhood as opposed to the atheist neighborhood, or had some irrelevant factor with respect to your upbringing. And that second, the kind of move of saying, well, guess I'm lucky to have been brought up in just the right neighborhood to have all the right beliefs, is a kind of question-begging thing to say. So I was just taking that to be the moral of the case you were giving.
It does seem question-begging to me. The thing
Yeah.
about the guy saying, how lucky I am that I had just the right hunger level when I walked into the grocery store. You can imagine him having tossed a coin before going in the store to decide whether to have a big snack before shopping. Good thing the coin came out this way.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, one concern about this, and maybe this is going to relate to Adam's own view when you get onto that, is this sort of worry about question being is a familiar one from traditional philosophical arguments about much more radical skepticism about the external world, or when we can ask questions about whether we're radically deceived about our situation, whether we're, the sort of stories about being in the Matrix or being in a brain in a vat. And it's very hard to tell some story about why we should think that we're actually sitting here having a conversation on the phone, and not one of these sort of strange scenarios. It's very hard to tell a story which isn't sort of question-begging in the same way. In a similar way, I don't have, if the question arises, are my visual faculties reliable or something, it's very hard to give an argument for why I suppose they are reliable, which is completely independent of the use of those faculties. And so, while it seems like a natural sort of diagnosis of what we worry about in these cases, the worry is that the kind of diagnosis we're giving there relies on principles which might actually lead to far more radical kind of skeptical conclusions, which is not what most people have in mind when they're thinking about the worry about influences on their beliefs from their upbringing.
So far, I think we've really just laid out this alleged problem of contingency or influence of irrelevant factors. And now I'm going to stick my neck out and let me describe a view on this issue, and you guys can make trouble. So here's the view. The view is that contingency, the news of contingency in and of itself provides no evidence against the original view. Contingency in and of itself is no cause for ratcheting back one's confidence, but it can be evidence of something else that should make you ratchet back your confidence, namely that your beliefs are incoherent. Here's the sort of case I'm thinking of. Suppose you're doing a math problem. So you have some arithmetic problem. And after you do it, someone says, if you'd done that problem on a different color pad of paper, you would have gotten a different answer. This should really make you less confident in your original answer. And I think the reason it should make you less confident is that you're sure that the color of the pad is irrelevant to the answer to the mathematical facts. And you're sure that whatever color the pad was, you would have been proceeding from exactly the same starting state, namely do such and such calculation, and be committed to exactly the same principles for how the calculation should proceed, namely.
So Adam, just
Josh, you wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, no, just to clarify the case. I mean, if someone said to me, hey, if you had gotten a different, you would have gotten a different answer if you'd used a different color pad, I would just, think they were nuts or joking or something like that. So, I mean, to really make the case pressing, we need someone who's reliable, someone who's not at all, you have good evidence that they're not joking, Or you have some sort of direct evidence that if you had done the example again on a different pad of paper, you would have gotten a different example, a different answer, right? So just to get clear on what the case is.
Sure.
Right?
And I mean, although the pad of paper influence is fanciful, there are cases of things influencing people's answers in ways you wouldn't expect. There's a really nice psychology study in which subjects were given headphones, and they were told, these are jogging headphones, we need to test them out. So when we play these sounds in the ears, move your head up and down like this while you're here listening to these sounds. Now the things they play in their ears are arguments. And then they ask them at the end of the experiment, by the way, how convincing were those arguments? In another condition, they're played the same arguments, but are given the instructions to shake their head like this while they're listening to them. And the result was people report being more convinced by the arguments in the nod condition than in the shake condition. So that's just an aside that, there are all sorts of strange influences on people's beliefs. But anyway, back to the math case. So you're given the same, you're committed to the same mathematical principles in either, no matter what color the pad was. So when you find out that the color of the pad changes what answer you're getting, that's like finding out that in at least one of those two conditions, you've gotten things wrong. In other words, it's evidence that you haven't lived up to your own mathematical standards. And so that's a way in which finding out that your answer depends on some irrelevant factor really should make you doubt your answer. Let me stop there and just see if you guys wanted to jump in on
that. That's fine. Maybe we should, well, for me anyway, maybe we should get the other side too.
Yeah, I want to jump in, but only after you give your more positive part of the story.
Okay, so I think that there's undermining in that case. But suppose we stipulate that away. Suppose we say, no, it's a person who's sure that their own reasoning lives up to all of their own most fundamental standards. They're perfectly coherent. The standards they accept perfectly cohere with the actual reasoning they do. One nice idealization of such a person would be a person who's a perfect Bayesian. So they have some probability function, and they're perfectly coherent, and they're perfectly confident that their Bayesian prior is just the prior that people should have. In that case, I claim that the news that one's beliefs are influenced by an irrelevant factor should not shake one's confidence in those beliefs at all. So that's a bald claim that the contingency doesn't matter. And I owe an explaining away story of why it seems to matter. And I have two sorts of ways of attempting to explain this away. One is, in fact, in all real cases, people really are subject to incoherence. And so in real cases, there really should be some undermining, because you should think, if things had been different in this irrelevant way, I would have believed a different thing. That really is evidence that maybe my reasoning isn't up to the standards that I'm committed to. But there's another thing that could be going on, and that is people, this thought that one's most basic standards could themselves be wrong, is invoked by the problem of contingency. The problem of contingency makes the existence of alternative systems of belief also totally coherent. Makes the existence of those alternative systems more salient, and so makes more pressing a kind of global skeptical worry. The worry, hey, wait a second, sure, everything I believe fits together, my beliefs follow from just the standards I accept, but there are other alternative systems of belief that are just as coherent, and so maybe mine's wrong. All right, so that's a view, and curious what you guys think.
So I'll say briefly some what I'm uncomfortable about, and then Josh will have a little bit more to say, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
So if I can introduce another couple of cases, these are, again, these contrived cases. So back to the story about, we imagine we're watching this video of evil scientists messing with this young baby's brain, but we see that the evil scientist is flipping a coin, but what he's doing is just deciding what fundamental standards, as you say, the child gets. Is not doing anything to affect how that child is going to live up to those standards. In fact, we can suppose the child is going to do perfectly fine. It's just the coin flip is just affecting the standards. Now, at this point, is watching the video. If we ask ourselves, what are the odds that the child is going to get good standards or bad standards, or what are the odds he's going to get the answer right to a certain question, which will hinge on what standards he gets. Obviously, we're going to have very little confidence. We're going to think it's 50-50. But now as the camera pans back and we see the crib has a name on it, the name tag says Adam Elga. At this point, of course, Adam has to think to himself, oh, well, in that case, this kid turned out okay. Once he discovers that it's him, and discovers that... so I take it on this story, that's going to be your reaction, is to... think that doesn't undermine my confidence and my convictions, because all it's done is the sort of contingent factors only affected what standards I get. Now, I mean, a lot of what feels uncomfortable about any of these cases feels the same. So I feel the same sort of discomfort in that case. The same sort of sense of sort of question begingness, where we sort of think, well, at first we thought there's no clue, 50-50 as to whether or not this child is going to get the right answer. But then when you discover that it's yourself, and you say, well, now I know that he got the right answer. So it still elicits the same sort of feeling as other cases do. And you still get the same feeling whether I set it up as the evil scientist just affecting your standards, or whether instead what he does is he puts some glitch in the program in the brain, which will cause you with a 50% chance of not reasoning in accord with your own standards.
Let me just make sure I get the case straight. So before the camera pans back, we see that the kid, there's this coin flip, and is it that if it comes up heads, there's one particular, say, Bayesian prior that the kid is given?
Sure, we could do it.
Tails, it's another one. And when we're in the stage one of the experiment, do we know exactly do we know the exact two priors or not?
Yeah, we can suppose we don't.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or maybe we could even say we do, if we like, yeah.
Okay.
And we know the one will be put in there on heads and the other on tails. Of course, we have no idea which way the coin will land.
Okay. In that version of the case, so here I am. I let's say I know my own prior. I'm committed to saying that that I'm happy with my own prior, in the sense that I'm confident that it's the right one, say. Then when I hear about this baby, I should think, that's the choice between what an unlucky baby to have a 50% chance imposed on him of getting such a bad prior, namely the other one, the one that doesn't match mine. I hope for that baby's sake that he gets the good one. And then the camera pans back. I see that it's cribs labeled Adam Elga, and I think, whew, he got the good one.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be the same as if you just, even if it wasn't you discovered it was you, you just discovered he got this prior.
Yeah.
And you'll say, that's good, he got that one.
Right. So I mean, just to make the case more concrete, suppose that this is one of the priors is an ordinary prior that encodes ordinary inductive practices. So the sort of prior such that someone with that prior, upon seeing the sun rise many days in a row, will be confident that it'll rise the next day. And suppose the alternative prior is the one, a counterinductive one, so that on the evidence that the sun has risen 1,000 days in a row, um, the that person will be confident that things are going to be very different tomorrow. The laws of nature are going to operate in a very different way. I better strap myself to my bed tonight because gravity's not going to operate tomorrow.
Right. I mean, focusing on that sort of case is very compelling. I feel like
Well, that's why I snuck in.
I have to say, I have to follow you in this sort of case and think, yeah, of course I can see that I did get lucky and got the inductivist prior and not the crazy prior. So I'm committed to being able to, I'm committed to saying, well, antecedently I had no way how this experiment was going to turn out, 50-50 as to whether this child was going to get a good prior or a bad prior. But then on the other side, I have to judge that I'm in a position to be able to tell, no, I'm actually, I got lucky. I mean, it's an uncomfortable position to take, although it's a position I think you can only reasonably take when it comes to something fundamental like induction. But once I take that sort of line, it's harder to see then why I shouldn't be able to extend it to the other sorts of cases, where what the chance factor is affecting is just my performance, whether I'm living up to my own standards. So it's harder to see why the same sort of move isn't available to me when the coin flip is the other sort of case, where it's just affecting. I think, why can't I think a similar sort of thing that I think, well, it's slim chance that it's going to work out well, and this child is going to live up to his own standards. But then, from the inside, I can think to myself, well, I did live up to my own standards. I can tell that I'm judging correctly when I think about these things. I mean, before we're saying that sounds fishy because it sounds question-begging, especially in these other cases, like the shopping case and so on. But I just can't feel comfortable about the way we're trying to distinguish the cases.
One difference between the two cases is it matters that in the one case but not the other, we're talking about one's fundamental standards being different in the two scenarios. So
Right.
in the math case, for example, there's a single assessment, mode of assessment that I think I would have endorsed that mode of assessment no matter what the color of the pad was. And so I can use that kind of reasoning and bracket the detailed reasoning of the arithmetic problem. And just a side note for loyal Philosophy TV listeners and fans of the problem of disagreement, this is very similar sort of bracketing that people sometimes appeal to when they're describing how one should be moved by the news that an epistemic peer has disagreed. So in the math case, I think you're right that it would be question begging to say, oh, I did this calculation, the calculation's right, so it must be that the color of the pad was just the right color to get me to do the calculation right. The standpoint from which we can assess that as question begging is a standpoint in which we bracket off the detailed mathematical calculation and assess that calculation from some standpoint that in that case, that is immune to the relevant effect of the pad. Now, things are different in the case of the global injection of the prior because it's not clear how you could bracket off your total epistemic system all at once and assess from that other standpoint your current prior.
Right. We probably should move on to Josh's.
Yeah.
So I guess I had a case that's in some respects similar to the case Roger just gave, but it was also meant to put some pressure on your view, Adam. So the idea is, well, I guess the case is meant to do two things. It's supposed to be a case that, first of all, doesn't quite fit with doesn't fit with the claim that with fundamental rules, there's no room for downgrading your beliefs, but also it's meant to show that the diagnosis you have of why people feel unease about these cases doesn't quite work. So here's the case. So imagine there are two communities of people, community A and community B, and they're causally independent. They don't interact in any way, shape, or form. I'm just thinking of two hypothetical communities. They have various views in common. So they all think there's some number of internally coherent fundamental standards that people could adopt or people could employ, right? So there's 100 of them, say, and each community has their own internally coherent standard. At least they think they've got an internally coherent fundamental standard for reasoning, and they think they've gotten the right one. They're employing the right one. One of them is correct, and 99 of them is wrong, right? And they both communities think the following. They think that the way they got the standards are innate somehow. The way they have these standards is, I don't know, God implanted, or some God implanted the standards in their brains that and that's why they grew up and had the epistemic standards they did. We could do this with evolution or some other role, but it's simpler for my purposes just to appeal to a God. Okay, so both communities have all of those beliefs, but community A and B differ in the following respect. Community A thinks that here's how God decided which standard to implant. God flipped a coin enough times to randomly pick one of those standards out of the 100 standards that are all internally coherent, and implanted that one in each of those community members. Right, so it was very lucky they hit upon the right standard. Community B, on the other hand, thinks that the God is epistemically benevolent, and he wants all of the members of the community to have the right standard, so he implanted the correct one, right? So is the case relatively clear?
I think so. So in both cases, they end up, let's say, with the correct standards. In the one case, it was by coin toss. In the other case, it was by the epistemically benevolent God.
Right. That's at least their beliefs about the situation. I don't think it matters what's actually going on in the case, but one community believes that they got the correct standards by a coin toss, and the other community believes that they got the correct standards by the epistemically benevolent God. Right. And then my claim, and I think it's pretty intuitive, is that the first community, community A, who thinks that the standard came via coin tosses, and many coin tosses, should feel a great deal of unease, and this should put pressure on community A's entire package of views in a way that community B shouldn't feel the very same pressure, or shouldn't feel pressure from that angle. And it seems like if that claim is right, that would seem to be a counterexample to your general view. But more importantly, perhaps, or at least what I'm even more convinced by is the idea that there will be this feeling of unease that community A should have, or does have, that community B doesn't have. And this isn't a feeling that's provoked or produced by the existence of alternative internally coherent standards, because by the lights of both communities, there are 99 other internally coherent, consistent standards that they could have instead employed. So whatever the feeling of unease comes from, it's not from the existence of these alternative standards. And I have some story about where that feeling of unease comes from, but maybe I should just stop there and see what you guys think.
I think it's a really interesting case. I have a way of. I'm curious about how this pressure should be. This pressure to give up one of the three things you. One of the things you said. There's pressure to give up. Should be given up. but I wanted to check and see if Roger had reactions he wanted to get in beforehand.
I think we need to hear a bit more of Josh's story about the tension.
Okay, yeah,
Right.
that's good.
Okay, so what the positive story is that I think what's going on is the following. And I think this is a very general claims. I'm just going to make a bunch of very general claims about choosing between theories, whether they be scientific theories or your theory of the entire world as you see it, your worldview. And the claim is just this. I mean, some facts seem to be epistemologically striking. They're very deeply interesting. They call out for explanation. I don't think that something being merely a chance occurrence or an unlikely occurrence is enough to be striking. That so and so won the lottery, where it was a 1,000,000 to 1, isn't a very striking fact necessarily, but that someone else won 1,000 lotteries in a row, each of which the chance was 1,000 to 1. That seems like a striking fact, even though the probabilities are exactly the same. So there's certain striking facts, and it's a count against a theory, whether it be a scientific theory or a theory, a worldview. If the theory can't give some sort of explanation for one of these striking facts, at least one of these striking facts within the domain of the theory, that the theory is in the business of explaining. And all things equal, we should prefer theories that explain where these striking facts come from, or what caused these striking facts. And we should prefer that over theories who just leave them as matters of chance or otherwise unexplained. And then in the particular case I was interested in, the community A, community B case, one community has an explanation. There's a benevolent God, and the epistemically benevolent God who implanted the correct standards. And having the correct standards seems like it counts as one of these striking facts. Whereas the other community doesn't have that explanation. And that puts some pressure on them to modify their theory of the world, as it were. So let me just stop there and see what you think of that.
Roger, did you want to jump in there? Or?
Sure. So I'm largely sympathetic. I mean, I think the case itself is very compelling. And I'm sympathetic to the idea of there being this kind of tension where you've got, tension, the general structure is you've got some alleged fact that P, the claim that it's a striking fact if it is a fact that P, and the claim that it came to be the case that P just by some random fluke or something.
That's right. There's no interesting explanation.
Roger, I think Josh wanted to jump in.
Oh, sorry, I didn't quite hear.
No, that's
okay. So as far as the point of just being there's something uncomfortable about that combination, that seems quite right to me. There's a further move when we talk about the pressure to give up one. So far, just saying that there's sort of a tension there is not to say anything about which direction sort of the tension pushes. So one could sort of go along with that while still maintaining that in the actual cases we're interested in, say where the striking fact is that I have, say, I don't know, reliable moral faculties or something, that the tension there doesn't give me any reason to doubt the reliability of moral faculties, but rather only gives me reason to doubt one of the other three factors, like perhaps doubt that they really did just come about randomly like that. Now, I actually, in my paper, I gave some weird cases involving some typing robots. I think maybe I can focus on some simpler cases. Part of what I wanted to do was extract one element of these cases. One thing that's particularly difficult about thinking about this sort of thing is there's special problems that come up in the first-person case where I'm trying to assess my own performance when I worry that I'm the one that was, my faculties were randomly produced. And I have to assess whether I think I've got reliable ones or not. If we can take that factor out of it by switching to a sort of third-person case where, let's say, I'm scrambling Josh's brain. So I randomly scramble Josh's brain in such a way that there's a very slim chance that it's actually going to result in him, say, being reliable at doing arithmetic. It could happen, but most likely he's going to be completely hopeless at arithmetic by this random scrambling. So I've done this. Now, it would be a remarkable fact if just by fluke he turned out to be great at math as a result of randomly scrambling his brain. So antecedently, I should be very suspicious. I should think, very unlikely that that will be the outcome. But suppose I do it, then I give him this math test, and Josh goes through and does the test, and I look at the answers, and I think all of these are right. Now, while I feel there's something very uncomfortable about saying, well, that just happened by accident, but nevertheless he is reliable at arithmetic, and there's something uncomfortable about holding that combination. But it seems that in this case the tensional pushes in the direction of saying something went wrong. I didn't really randomly scramble his brain. Maybe someone intervened to stop the scrambling process or something like that. But it doesn't seem as though what I've got there is a reason to doubt my judgment about his performance on the test. I mean, I can look at the test and see, no, those answers are right. Now, there are other sorts of cases where I might be, well, I mean, maybe we should just stick to this case for the time being. It feels as though once I make it a third-person case like this, then any sort of tension pushing me to doubt my judgment about Josh's performance is removed. The tension just pushes to giving up the other thought that I really was just an accident that he turned out this way. It does feel very different when I make it a first-person case, when I'm scrambling my own brain, and then having done what I think was a random scrambling, I sit down and do some math and then look at my answers and say, oh, I got those all right. That seems very fishy. But that seems fishy for all the sorts of reasons, the sort of question-begging reasons that we've been talking about. My interest was in whether this diagnosis in terms of the strikingness of the phenomenon of randomly turning out to be reliable added a kind of worry over and above the sort of worries we have about that sort of question-begging response. So I guess that's what I'm doubtful about. Now, I'm not completely sure whether Josh is thinking of it as adding something over and above that. But,
well, so the way I mean, I don't really have much to disagree with in anything you just said. Though I imagine Adam is going to have some things to disagree with in what we're both, I think, committing to. So I completely agree with the idea that when you have one of these, when you have this tension coming from the existence of, purported fact that's purportedly striking and is purportedly unexplained, there's some pressure to give up one of those claims, that it's a fact, that it's striking, or that it's, or whatever the background theory it is that can't explain it. And in different cases, the pressure will be pressure to do different things. So if, in your case of, mucking with my brain and then seeing my responses to this math quiz, and you see perfectly well that I got it 100% right, it seems like in that case, the tension pushes us to not to give up the claim that, I'm now a reliable arithmetic reasoner, whereas before maybe I wasn't, but to give up the claim, the background theory that says here's what the probabilities were that I would end up a reliable thinker. They were minuscule, or the machine worked. You give up that claim. So that seems right to me. But it's, I take it the main point of the example was meant to put pressure on Adam's view that there was a big difference between what was happening in the case of fundamental methods and other cases where you weren't living up to your own methods. It seems to me that Roger and I are in agreement that there's no important difference between those two cases insofar as there's this tension that arises. The only difference, if there is one, is that maybe, perhaps, in the fundamental cases, you can't assuage the tension by giving up on the fact that you're a reliable thinker or that you're using the right fundamental rules.
In which case, the only place to go is to become doubtful that there was a relevant factor influencing your beliefs, right?
Yeah, doubtful that there was an irrelevant factor influencing your beliefs. Or, I mean, it's at least notionally possible that in some cases there's nothing to do but swallow some tension and say, well, this is the best view I have. It still has some internal tensions, but there's no better view. I mean, that I don't want to say that, tension's always going to push you to do something. Sometimes there's nothing to be done. But what I do want to claim is that even in the fundamental cases, there is this pressure, and this pressure is epistemically significant, and it can do some work, at least some of the time in some of these cases.
I have a diagnostic case to ask you about for both of you. Consider the case of someone, it's a pair of cases. In both cases, the person goes back and gets some archives of their early life, and in one case, they find that their parents tossed a coin to determine which of two Bayesian priors to instill in them. Okay. And the two priors are quite different. In another case, the person gets just the same sort of evidence, evidence of seeming corresponding strength, that the parents flipped a coin to determine which hair color the person had. The question for you both is, does it take more to convince you that your prior was chosen by coin flip than it does to convince you that your hair color was chosen by coin flip? Or should it be? And the reason I'm putting this case out there is because there's some tendency to think that if it's really an uncomfortable tension to think, think that your prior came by a random factor, then it should push you against thinking that your prior came about by an irrelevant factor.
I mean, this may be theory infected, but my inclination is to think it would be harder for me to believe my prior
Really?
came by. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
But again, I might be in the grips of my own view, so I don't really have an obvious. I mean, do you have the contrary intuition?
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, Roger, where are you on this case?
Well, I hope I've got the details right, but I'm thinking if it's just a coin flip, I mean, if we changed it so it wasn't just a coin flip, but some huge lottery.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
Now, the probability is the same in the two cases, so might be, I mean, I don't know what to use instead of hair color. But
No, it could
very
be a
specific
huge number
shade
of hair
or
colors.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So they randomly picked out of a color chart,
That's right.
of billions of different colors, and so I have evidence that they did that to pick exactly my hair color. The other story is that they had billions of possible standards they could have, or Bayesian priors they could have given me, most of which are completely screwy from my point of view, and they happen to pick this one. If the story is told that way, I think I'm much more dubious in the case that they just randomly picked and got the right one. In the case of the epistemic standards or priors rather than the hair color.
So Adam, I mean, what's your view of that case, as Roger just elaborated on it?
I think it's an improved case. I'm happy to adopt the thousand-sided die version of the comparison case. To make the difference dramatic, let's suppose that the effect is very strong. The effect that it sounds like you guys think holds, that there's a big asymmetry between how you should react in these two cases. Let's say that it's really hard in the case of your prior to get convinced that there was a coin toss. That seems very weird to me. This is now what I'm about to say is just intuition pumping, but think of the case. Two twins are, one of them is given the one sort of news, the other is given the other sort of news. The parents pull out the videotape and they show the thousand-sided die being rolled in both cases and the relevant injections being given in both cases, and both twins say, "Oh wow, this is so amazing that some factor was, about me was influenced." And then they say, and by the way, in the case of twin A, it was hair color that the injection controlled, and in the case of twin B, it was say your political beliefs or something like that, or your fundamental system as influences your political beliefs. And twin A should say, "Wow, that's weird that my hair color was influenced in this way," and twin B should say, "It's a fake. Liars." That seems weird to me.
Insofar as in the case of the changing the standards, there are ones that I are quite sure are correct, and I'm quite sure the alternatives are crazy. Then I do think I have a reason to be suspicious that they really just did that by accident. In the same way that you're suspicious when someone says, and this connects with a whole other issue to do with like arguments from design and stuff. The reason you're suspicious when someone says, "Look, I just shook up this bag full of parts and look, it turned into a watch." And I think, well, that's one of the many ways in which parts could be arranged. But I'm very suspicious when someone says, "I just did this by accident, and this is what I got." Whereas if they just said, "Look, I just picked this marble out of billions of different possible colors of marble, and this is the color I got," I'm not at all suspicious there that they just did that by accident. Now, there's a whole other story about why we should be more suspicious in the one case, not the other. It has to do with the salience of the case and why I'm sort of comparing one hypothesis, namely that it was just done, which is the one I'm given, is that it just happened accidentally, against other hypotheses about how it might have come about, namely that they actually had one in mind, and particularly when you're talking about, my parents or something who I think may have had my own interests in mind, and if they were going to pick out a prior for me, somewhat more likely they pick out a good one than a bad one. Whereas with something like hair color, I mean, if they were just going to randomly pick that, I don't know why they pick one rather than another. So the alternative hypothesis to the chance hypothesis in this case seems to lend more support to them having chosen this prior, which I take to be the right one, than it does on the side of picking colors. That's roughly the sort of story I tell as to why I have a different reaction in the two cases.
So in the most extreme version of this, only very extreme evidence would be capable of convincing you that it was a coin toss that determined, a multi-way coin toss that determined your prior. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would need a lot more.
All right.
Mm-hmm. Josh, do you want to jump in?
Well, I mean, I guess I just straightforwardly agree with Roger. I mean, what Roger was talking about with the salience of alternatives, I mean, that's just essentially one way of trying to cook up a theory of what I called strikingness was. And, you know, it could be that that's the right theory. It could be their alternatives. It's notoriously difficult to cook up a compelling theory of how strikingness ought to work. But, I mean, I think...
Question for you guys.
It's clear there is such a thing.
Suppose we... Oh, sorry, Josh, did I cut you off?
It's okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, Adam.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Modified case. Suppose that instead of just one really good prior and various nondescript bad ones, suppose that each of the 1,000 alternatives are highly striking in their own ways. Of course, only one of them is striking in the way of being very rational. But let's say others of them are striking in other ways, maybe having beautiful symmetry properties. Maybe one of them is achieves some extreme of badness. Yet another has a very detailed pattern. Does that change things in your case? And of course, I'm mentioning it because I'm trying to tempt you into saying that it changes things a lot.
I feel it changes things somewhat in that it makes it the one less salient because you've sort of tried to mimic that with the other alternatives.
I feel like I don't have very determinate intuitions about the case.
What? This is a totally everyday case. Wait.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm not sure it's a good diagnostic case because I just don't feel very strongly one way or the other about it. So suppose we're tempted in the way you're trying to tempt us, and that we say, you know, in such a case, there's less tension on your overall view. Whatever you ended up with, it would have been striking in one shape or another, and you know, so there's an explanation as to why there's some striking fact, but not why there is the particular striking fact you might have thought needed to be explained. All right. Okay, well, let's go with that. Does that help you out somehow?
Well, maybe you are happy to adopt that. If that's what's going on, then it seems like it's really the strikingness that's doing the work, and not the goodness. In other words, it's not the goodness is the correctness of one's system or prior. It just happens to be playing the role of the this striking thing.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I see.
Yeah. So if it turned out I had the prior that was going to make me the most humorous person, you know, somehow my beliefs were such that my action, it was going to entail that my actions were going to be maximally humorous or something crazy like that. I think there'd be the same overall tension. I'm not sure it's the goodness that's really doing the role. It's the contingency and the strikingness. Yeah, but now I mean, just to get a sense of where we're at right now,
yeah, and we should wrap up pretty soon.
Okay, it seems like at least Roger and I are on the same page with regard to the claim that there's this kind of tension that's possible and can apply even to one's basic norms or theories that are theories of how one came to have one's basic norms and things of that sort. And this is not the problem of disagreement, and it's not the problem of the contingency of our evidence, and it's not and it's not obviously a skeptical problem. Whereas Adam, you have the opposing view, and then Roger and I seem to disagree as to whether this could give us a reason to downgrade our view about our own norms, where I said, well, maybe sometimes it does, and Roger seems to think the tension, at least in the fundamental cases, always has to be assuaged in a different way. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's a great wrap-up, and I think a good way to end is to present again the case to the viewers, and I'm curious what people think. I actually haven't asked many people about this case. So, okay, Internet, should you be more doubtful of apparent video evidence that your prior was influenced by this random process than by apparent video evidence that your hair color was? Strikes me that I was thinking about the case that you should not be more doubtful. These guys say yes. Curious what people will think. Guys, thanks so much for the conversation. This was really fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Adam.
Okay, good night, everyone.
All right, bye.